Isaiah 34 and 35. Again, a very dramatic contrast between these two chapters in Isaiah. And it shows us what happens to those that respond to the Lord and who He is in Isaiah 35, how extremely the land and the people are blessed. Isaiah 34 shows us what happens to the land and the people, the inhabitants, if they resist God and His purposes. Again, very dramatic contrast. In Isaiah 34, it highlights the region of ancient Edom. Now, this refers to Edom was Esau and his the brother of Jacob, who had an enmity towards his brother from the very beginning, from Jacob taking the birthright, and he resented God's choice. Now, this went on through the bloodline, and God's saying this type of enmity and hatred towards Israel that happened throughout history, that all the nations will embody this anti-Semitism, and they will come against Israel to attack Israel. And that's why you see all the nations embodying that hatred of Edom in this chapter. And God says, I'm going to send my sword on them at the end times. I'm going to destroy them, and the blood will melt the mountains, and their carcasses will be left out. It's just such graphic language. And but by them siding against Israel and trying to destroy Israel, they're actually attacking God and His judgment, His leadership on the earth. So it's very personal to the Lord. That's why in verse 8 of 34, God says, it's for the cause of Zion that I am doing this. He even describes their destruction in terms of a sacrifice, which to God, like the sacrificial system, showed God's glory when people did it in the days of Moses and throughout their history. God's saying, when I destroy these nations, it's revealing who I am. It's revealing my righteousness. Now, if we look later on in 34, I don't want you to miss this. It's very important. It's the only place where Isaiah does this. He says, take notice what I'm talking about and see if it doesn't happen. Examine it. And then what does he say? He describes all these different unclean animals. He describes about 9 unclean animals. Some of them are birds that are going to be living in this land after He judges it. God said it's going to happen on the millennial earth. There'll be this region around parts of Jordan. It's parts of modern day Jordan, Edom is. Parts of modern day Iraq. That area will have, it'll be judged with fire. It'll be unlivable. Brimstone will be there for 1,000 years during His rule. And also these unclean animals. And it just leaves it very open, could possibly even be an opening to hell, because sometimes unclean birds mean demonic spirits in Revelation 18:2. And so this could be a part of hell coming out on the earth. It's definitely burning. These animals will somehow be there still living. We don't understand it all, but Isaiah says, examine this. He's talking, this is literal here. Now that's 34. I mean, it's very extreme. We go to 35, it's the other extreme. We have God renovating the earth, the desert, the wasteland, and the wilderness. These 3 terms, they're given God's glory. There's springs and marshes there now. These are all parts of Israel that have been uninhabitable in the past. And the term, I think, wilderness in English is actually the Arabah in Hebrew. Well, the Arabah is right next to Edom, ancient Edom. So not only is 34 and 35 next to each other in the book of Isaiah, the land of 34 and the land of 35, the geography, they're right next to each other. And in 35, it's blooming and blossoming. It's got the glory of the Lord. It looks like the Garden of Eden there. And God puts it just like that on the earth so that people can see what happens if you follow His leadership, you're under that blessing, or if you reject it, the burning fire. He's letting the inhabitants of the millennial earth really see His leadership in a geographical setting. And not only does it focus on the land, though, in 35, it's also the inhabitants. It's the people. The Jewish people are coming back on that highway, the highway of Isaiah 11. They're singing, they're joyful. They've been delivered out of prison camps. They've been delivered from the Antichrist. This is after the judgment. They're singing. They're coming back to Jerusalem to be with the Lord, to repopulate the nation. And this is also another passage that shows the Jewish people returning, being healed and restored. And again, a real pastoral point to this section is that this is why we need to study the judgments. We're doing this in the fast. We need to study the judgments. There's a very key verse. It's in verse 3. It says, strengthen the weak hands and make firm the feeble knees. Say to those that are fearful-hearted, the Lord's coming in vengeance. We need to know the Lord will come and judge when things are dark, when things are scary around us. God wants us to know the end time message, as it will strengthen our heart to endure persecution, endure hardship, so we can be able to endure it and be ready for Him. He gives these stark contrasts to give us hope. And that's why I like studying end times, and that's why I enjoy Isaiah 34 and 35. What a remarkable contrast of land and people and how those that are righteous are blessed.